My name is Heidi Lawson, and I'm 40. I'm a single mom, I work, and I thought I understood what family meant, right up until my younger sister took my daughter's birthday gift and slammed it onto the floor in front of everyone. It happened in a rented farmhouse outside Nashville, the kind of place people book to make their lives look prettier than they are. My daughter had spent 3 weeks working on that present after school, hunched over our kitchen table, saving every dollar she could to buy supplies. She was so proud she could barely sit still on the drive over. My sister didn't even bother to hide her boredom. She took the wrapped box with a sigh, peeled the paper like it was a chore, then stared at what was inside with a look I will never forget. No thank you. No smile. Just a tight little smirk. "Are you kidding me?" she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I don't need cheap trash like this." Then she let it drop. The gift hit the hardwood, the sound cutting through the music and chatter. My daughter froze. My parents glanced over, watched the whole thing, and chose to pretend nothing had happened. I felt something in me close like a door. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just reached for my daughter's hand, told her we were leaving, and walked out of that farmhouse without looking back. Before I tell you what she said next, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The drive back to our place outside Nashville felt longer than it really was. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, but my mind was already sorting through numbers, dates, and quiet favors that had turned into expectations. I have been a single mother for years. I work full-time in compliance for a regional logistics company, the kind of job where you read fine print until your eyes ache and make sure other people follow rules they would rather ignore. Somewhere along the way, I forgot to apply the same standards to my own family. My daughter, Sienna, is 14. She is careful with everything she touches, always planning 3 steps ahead, always worried about whether she has done enough. Lately, most of that energy had gone into trying to earn my sister's approval. I had watched it happen and told myself it was harmless. My sister Chelsea has always been the one who just needs a little help. Growing up, she was the kid teachers excused, the one my parents defended no matter what the story was. As adults, that pattern never really changed. It only got more expensive. My father, Frank, and my mother, Judith, live on a modest pension and Social Security. They tell anyone who will listen that they sacrificed everything for us, and in some ways, that is true. What they leave out is how often they expect me to plug the gaps in their budget, how naturally they turned to me whenever a bill showed up that they did not want to face. When Chelsea decided she wanted to run her own event styling business, she did not start by writing a plan or saving money. She started by calling me. She knew I had good credit and a stable income. She also knew that I found it hard to say no when someone framed a request as, "for the family." I told myself I was being supportive when I agreed to co-sign the lease for her storage space, to put my name next to hers on the contract for her inventory and equipment. At the time, it felt like a temporary boost, a little push to get her moving. In reality, I had tied my financial life to the girl who had once racked up charges on our parents' credit card and shrugged when the bill came. Chelsea's business was not a necessity. It was balloon arches for baby showers, rented centerpieces for birthday dinners like the one we had just left, and last-minute decorations for people who wanted their photos to look special. My obligation, however, was very real. Every missed payment threatened my credit score, my ability to refinance my own life, my margin for emergencies that belonged to me and my child. For the past 2 years, I have been the one who quietly covered late fees when Chelsea forgot due dates. When a vendor threatened to cut her off, I stepped in and negotiated a new schedule. When my parents worried about keeping their lights on, I added their utility account to my online bill pay and convinced myself it was easier than arguing. I told Sienna that helping family was important, that stepping up when you could was part of being an adult. She heard those words, watched what I did, and learned that her mother's time and money were resources anyone in our bloodline could claim. The only person who seemed to worry about the cost was the one who had no say in the decisions. I never called it what it was. I called it being the responsible one, the dependable daughter. I told myself that if I kept everyone afloat long enough, they would eventually learn to swim. That night, sitting at our own kitchen table while Sienna picked at the edge of a napkin, I finally let myself replay the scene in that farmhouse without making excuses for anyone. The same people who had no trouble asking me to sign my name for their debts had stood still while my child's work hit the floor like it meant nothing. The realization did not land as a burst of anger. It arrived like a spreadsheet finally balancing after years of wrong entries. Every favor I had extended, every payment I had made, every time I had swallowed my discomfort stacked itself in order, and the total was uglier than I wanted to admit. The version of my family I carried in my head did not match the people I was actually dealing with. I was not guiding them through a temporary rough patch. I was financing their refusal to grow up and letting my daughter think it was the price of belonging. I opened my laptop, logged into the account where I kept copies of every agreement I had ever signed for Chelsea, and scrolled until her name filled the screen. By the next morning, the fallout had already started. My phone lit up before my alarm went off. Notifications layered over each other until the screen was just a blur of names and preview lines. I lay still, listening to the buzz on the nightstand, letting the noise stack up instead of leaping to answer like I usually did. When I finally reached for it, the missed calls list was already too long to scroll through without pausing. My parents, my sister. Unknown numbers that were probably cousins I had not heard from in years. The group thread my family used for every holiday photo and minor crisis had exploded overnight. I did not open every message. I saw enough in the previews to know the pattern by heart. Words like overreacting, sensitive, disrespectful, ungrateful floated past my thumb. No one mentioned my daughter by name. No one typed out the word apology. The only feelings that counted in those threads were my sister's. The old version of me would have typed back excuses for them, smoothed it over, translated their insults into something softer inside my own head. Instead, I set the phone face down on the table and made coffee. Sienna's bedroom door stayed closed. It was a school day, but I gave her the extra minutes. She had spent 3 weeks building something with love and watched it break under someone else's heel. There was no point in telling her to brush it off. After I dropped her at school, I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store and sent one message that did not go to the family thread. I emailed Denise Stratton, the attorney who had reviewed my paperwork the last time Chelsea missed a payment, and a vendor came after me instead. I had hired Denise for a narrow task back then. I wanted someone to explain how badly I had boxed myself in. She laid it out with clinical precision. The contracts I had co-signed, the guarantees I had extended, the ways my sister's choices could legally reach into my bank account if I kept letting things slide. I had listened, nodded, and then asked her to negotiate a new schedule so Chelsea would not lose her storage space. I walked away from that meeting relieved and ashamed in equal measure. This time my email was short. I told her the situation had changed. I told her I was finished acting as a shield. I asked what it would look like to remove every voluntary layer of support I had wrapped around my family and to enforce the boundaries written into the agreements I had signed. She called me back before I finished my coffee. Denise never wasted words. She confirmed what she already knew about my file, then asked 2 questions that mattered now. Which payments were still optional, and how much risk I was prepared to accept in the short term. Optional meant the transfers I had set up to cover my parents' utilities and the automatic payments I had allowed to run from my account when Chelsea let an invoice slide. Those could stop today if I chose. The contracts with my name printed under hers were more complicated. There were notice periods and default clauses, sections that granted the vendor or landlord the right to reclaim inventory or lock a space if terms were broken. For years, I had treated those sections like worst-case scenarios to be avoided at all costs, even if it meant stepping in with my own money. Denise walked me through a different angle. Those same clauses could function as a boundary if I stopped treating them like empty threats and started treating them like part of the structure. We went line by line. She dictated the language for a formal notice to the storage company, informing them that I would no longer authorize my account to be used as backup for missed payments, and that any future delinquencies were to be handled according to the original agreement. She drafted a separate letter to the main vendor, revoking permission to charge my card and directing all billing to my sister alone. By the time I parked outside my office, the emails were in my inbox, ready to sign and send. Ending the extra transfers to my parents was as simple as logging into my bank's bill pay and clicking a few toggles from on to off. Ending the pattern that had kept those transfers alive was harder, but there was no button for that. I sat in the driver's seat with my laptop open, the cursor blinking over Denise's closing line. It stated, in neutral legal language, that my obligations would be limited to the exact terms on paper and nothing more. For the first time in years, that felt like a reasonable place to start. Within a few days, the paperwork I had signed started to matter. The storage company reached out first. They sent an automated notice to the email address on file, copying me because my name still appeared on the original lease. The message was dull and clinical, a line of text about a missed payment, a late fee, and a date by which the balance had to be cleared. At the bottom was the sentence Denise had built for me, confirming that authorization to bill my account had been revoked. There was a time when seeing that kind of notice would have made my stomach drop. I would have grabbed my wallet, convinced myself I was preventing a bigger disaster, and paid whatever amount the company demanded before my sister even knew there was a problem. This time, I did nothing. I read the email twice, filed it in a folder with Denise's other correspondence, and closed my laptop. 2 days later, the vendor who supplied most of Chelsea's event inventory followed with their own message. They were placing her account on hold pending payment in full. No new orders, no rush shipments, no exceptions. My card information had been scrubbed from their system. If Chelsea wanted their services, she would have to stand on her own. I did not hear from her directly at first. The silence was almost stranger than the usual flood of requests. My parents filled the gap. My mother left voicemails thick with righteous disappointment, describing my sister pacing their kitchen, insisting that the timing could not be worse. My father leaned on his health, reminding me that stress was bad for his heart, and hinting that if anything happened to him, it would be on my conscience. Those messages landed differently now. Before, I would have argued with myself in the dark, replayed every word, and twisted their guilt into a reason to keep paying. Now I listened long enough to understand the strategy, and then I saved the recordings. Not because I needed proof for anyone else, but because I wanted an honest record of how they behaved when they thought I could still be moved. The practical consequences for Chelsea showed up in quieter places. A cousin posted pictures from a birthday party online, tagging my sister's business in a caption that mentioned a last-minute cancellation. A former client wrote that she had been told there was an issue with supply and asked publicly if anyone knew another stylist who could step in. The kind of small reputational cracks that appear when someone drops the ball more than once. In the background, Denise kept me updated on the contractual side. If Chelsea missed another payment to the storage company, they had the right to deny access and eventually clear out her unit. If the vendor did not receive funds by a certain point, they would forward the account to collections in her name. None of this was personal. It was the natural weight of agreements she had signed, and I had stopped cushioning. It took about a week for Chelsea to finally reach out. Not to apologize, not to ask what had changed, but to accuse. She sent a long message accusing me of sabotaging her livelihood, of being jealous, of abandoning her just when her business was about to take off. She wrote that no one would ever understand how cruel I was being, that family did not treat each other this way. I read the message on my lunch break, sitting in my car in the company lot. There was a brief, familiar urge to explain myself, to outline every payment I had made and every deadline I had quietly rescued. I could have typed out a full history and still not convinced her of anything. In her version of the story, my resources were simply part of the environment, like air conditioning or running water. I did not respond. The moment I failed to defend myself, the script shifted. New messages arrived, shorter and sharper, bouncing between pleading and contempt. Each one assumed that if she just found the right combination of words, I would remove the consequences and reset the game to the way it had always been. Instead, I went home, cooked dinner with Sienna, and told her only what she needed to know, that some payments were stopping, that it might make people angry, and that none of it was her fault. She nodded slowly, weighing that information with more care than most adults in our family had ever used. Then she changed the subject to a school project, and for the first time in a long time, our evening felt like it belonged to us. The quiet in our house did not last long. For a few evenings, life shrank back to simple routines. I went to work, Sienna went to school, and we filled the hours between with homework, dinner, and small jokes that felt like borrowed light. My phone still buzzed, but I kept it on silent on a shelf, out of reach. The crisis I had avoided for so many years was finally unfolding, and I had chosen not to stand in front of it. The first time someone pounded on our front door, it was a little after 10 on a weeknight. I was rinsing dishes while Sienna scrolled on her laptop at the kitchen table. The knock was not tentative. It was a closed fist hitting wood hard enough to rattle the frame. Sienna jumped, the chair scraping tile. My instinct was to flip on the porch light and open the door halfway, to keep peace by letting whoever was on the other side unload their anger in my doorway instead of in the street. Years of compliance work and one conversation with Denise kept me frozen in place long enough to think. I wiped my hands on a towel, reached for my phone instead of the lock, and pulled up the camera feed from the small device mounted by the door. Chelsea stood on the porch, hair pulled back, eyes bright with a mix of fury and something that looked uncomfortably like panic. She hit the door again, then leaned on the bell, holding it down until the chime blurred into a single continuous sound. I did not open the door. I told Sienna to go to her room and close the door, voice calm enough that she obeyed without argument. Only when I heard her footsteps on the hallway carpet did I unmute my phone and call the non-emergency police line. I explained that a family member was at my door, that she was refusing to leave, that we had had financial disputes and I did not feel safe engaging with her directly. The dispatcher asked if there were weapons. I said no. She asked if anyone was hurt. I said not yet. Then she told me officers would drive by and check, that I should not open the door, that I should keep the line open if the situation escalated. Outside, Chelsea kept alternating between banging on the wood and pacing in front of the porch, talking to herself in bursts I could not fully hear through the glass. Once she pulled out her phone and held it up like she was filming. I knew how that video would look if she chose to edit it a certain way. A sister locked out, framed as a victim turned away by a cold woman inside. When the squad car finally rolled onto our street, the change in her posture showed before the blue lights washed our driveway. She straightened, folded her arms, and turned her story toward the officers, pointing at the house as if I had committed an offense by not opening the door on command. I watched the conversation through the camera feed, my phone balanced on the counter, heart steady but not calm. The officers did not come to my door. They spoke with her for several minutes. Then one of them gestured toward the sidewalk and the street. After another round of animated complaints, she left, shoulders tight, hands cutting the air as she walked back to her car. When the quiet returned, it was not the same kind of quiet we had enjoyed earlier that week. This one was edged with the knowledge that a line had been crossed and that it would not be the last attempt. Sienna came out of her room only after I knocked and told her it was over. She tried to pretend it was nothing, but her hands shook when she reached for a glass of water. I sat with her at the table and handed her the phone so she could see the recording from the camera. It was important to me that she know we were not imagining the intensity, that there was a record outside her own anxious memory. The next day, I sent the footage to Denise and asked about the process for a restraining order. I also emailed the school counselor, explained in plain terms that there had been an incident at our home, and asked if Sienna could have someone to talk to on campus. None of this fixed anything overnight. It did not turn my front door into a shield or erase the sound of my sister's fist against the wood. What it did, slowly and quietly, was replace the old script of "we have to take it" with a new one. We do not open the door just because someone is shouting on the other side. A week later, the same pressure found its way to my office. Work was where my life stayed orderly. My badge opened the same doors every morning, and the rules were written down where everyone could see them. That day followed the usual pattern until just after lunch. I was reviewing a compliance report when a notification popped up from our front desk channel. 2 visitors were at the main gate asking for me by name. They did not have an appointment and they were refusing to leave. I assumed a carrier had mixed up paperwork. Then I clicked the attached camera still. Frank and Judith stood outside the security gate, Judith gripping a piece of poster board that looked like it had been pulled from a closet. Thick black marker spelled out a message large enough to read from my chair on the 3rd floor. Their daughter turned her back on family. It was a neat tableau for anyone passing by. An aging couple, a blunt accusation, a closed gate. From a distance, the villain was easy to assign. Instead of heading downstairs, I messaged our HR manager, Evan McBride, and asked if we could talk. Minutes later, I sat in a small conference room while he pulled up the live camera feed on his tablet. He watched in silence, then looked at me with the steady focus of someone trained to spot patterns before they became problems. He asked for context. I gave him the version that mattered for the company. I had ended some financial support. My relatives were upset. There had been an incident at my home that involved the police. Now they were trying to pull my job into the middle of a family dispute. I did not recite every slight. I focused on behavior that might be repeated. Evan notified building security. On the screen, a uniformed guard stepped out of the booth and walked over to my parents. There was no audio, only careful gestures, and the way my mother jabbed a finger toward the building as if proximity alone proved something. My father shifted his weight from one leg to the other, leaning on the optics of frailty. The guard motioned toward the sidewalk and the public street. After a brief exchange, my mother lowered her sign and they moved off company property. For anyone else, it was a forgettable moment on a busy day. For me, it marked the point where my family's chaos stopped being private and became a security incident. Evan documented what had happened, then asked if I had any legal protections in place. I told him I was pursuing a restraining order against my sister and that I had video from the late-night visit to my house. He asked me to forward the footage and a short summary to the company's legal department so they could prepare for any repeat appearances. By the end of the afternoon, legal had drafted a letter instructing my parents and my sister to stop attempting contact with me at work. It stated that the property was private, that their presence at the gate disrupted operations, and that any future visits could trigger a call to law enforcement for trespassing. Copies went out by certified mail and email. I did not know if they would take the warning seriously until the second attempt. This time, only my mother showed up. She chose a Friday afternoon, when the parking lot was full and people were already thinking about the weekend. She stood just beyond the gate with a smaller sign and a fixed smile, trying to catch the eye of anyone walking by. Security recognized her from the file. They spoke with her briefly, confirmed why she was there, and called the non-emergency police line without involving me. In our follow-up meeting the next week, Evan explained that officers had arrived, reminded her of the prior warning, and made it clear that another appearance could result in a citation. He repeated that the company's priority was employee safety and the smooth running of the site, and that I would not be judged by my relatives' choices. The reassurance landed harder than I expected. I had spent years assuming that any trouble near me would become my fault, that holding everything together meant absorbing impact whenever someone else crashed. Seeing my employer draw a clean line where I had once drawn smudged ones shifted something I had taken for granted. Home still felt fragile. The front door still carried the memory of that relentless knocking and the bell cutting through the quiet. At work, though, there were systems that did not care about last names or shared blood, only about conduct. For the first time, I let myself consider that I was allowed to expect the same standard from my family as we demanded from strangers. Time did not stop for any of us. It simply shifted into a stricter rhythm. Within a few weeks, the forms Denise filed became signed orders from a judge. The restraining order against my sister was granted. The wording was dry, but the effect was sharp. She had to stay away from my home, from Sienna's school, and from my workplace. For the first time, the distance I needed from her was not just emotional, it was written into law. My parents met their own boundary through systems instead of through me. After the written warning that followed my mother's appearance at the office gate, there were no more signs or scenes near my job. They did not suddenly see my side. They saw that, this time, pushing would trigger consequences I would not be cushioning. Chelsea's business, built on my credit and hesitation, began to fold. The storage company followed its policy after another missed payment, locking the unit and clearing it when no money appeared. The vendor, who had once rushed shipments for her, treated her as just another overdue account. Inventory went wherever unpaid inventory goes, and her carefully curated business page stopped posting new work. Most of what happened after that reached me in scraps. Relatives I had not blocked yet posted vague complaints about how things had gotten hard. I heard that Chelsea left the rental house she had staged for photos and moved into a smaller place over a strip mall, picking up hours at a chain store to keep up with basic bills. I heard that my parents moved from their 3-bedroom house into a 1-bedroom apartment on a bus route, their furniture thinned down to what would fit. I did not cheer for any of it. Most days I carried a tight mix of sadness and relief. I was watching a structure fall that had never really been stable, and I was finally not the one running around underneath, trying to hold its beams in place. Meanwhile, Sienna kept showing up for her days. She went to school, met with the counselor we had been assigned, and slowly took back ordinary things I had stopped noticing. She made it through a week without jumping at the sound of the doorbell, and started sleeping through the night again. The ruined birthday gift stayed on a shelf for a while, then disappeared into a box in her closet, filed away with other things she no longer wanted to see every day. Months after the party, an envelope arrived with my sister's handwriting on the front. I waited until Sienna was upstairs, then opened it at the kitchen counter. The pages inside were crowded with lines that moved between apology and blame. She wrote that she had been under stress, that she had not meant to hurt my daughter, that everything had spiraled. She also wrote that I had gone too far, that family should fix things in private, that she deserved another chance. For a moment, old instincts stirred. I imagined calling her, setting careful rules, trying to keep some thread of connection while pretending the past could be folded neatly away. Then I pictured my child at that same table, fingers shaking around a glass of water after the night my sister would not leave our porch. That picture answered for me. I put the letter back in its envelope and sent Denise a short email asking her to add it to my file. That was the last time I handled anything from my sister myself. If more messages came later, they passed through other hands. I chose not to be the filter anymore. At home, the quiet started to feel less like a pause and more like a beginning. Sienna turned 15. She saved for materials and started a new project in a corner of the living room. A small wooden box with a sliding lid and clean edges. This time, she told me from the start that it was for her. Watching her measure and sand that box felt like watching her rebuild trust in her own effort instead of waiting for someone else to approve it. I did not come out of this feeling heroic. I came out of it with a lesson I wish I had learned much earlier. Offering support is not the same as erasing the consequences of someone's choices, especially when those choices land on people you are supposed to protect. Saying no after years of yes will always sound cruel to the ones who depended on your silence, but that does not make the no wrong. If any of this sounds familiar, I hope you hear this part clearly. You are allowed to stop pouring money, time, and energy into patterns that hurt you or your children, even when the people asking share your last name. You are allowed to ask whether being a good daughter or being a good sibling has quietly become being an unpaid safety net for adults who refuse to change. You are allowed to choose your child's safety, your own stability, and your future over someone else's comfort. When I think back now to the moment my sister dropped my daughter's gift on the floor, I no longer see just a ruined present. I see the moment everyone in that room showed me what they valued. Once I believed what I was seeing, my decision stopped being about revenge and became about alignment, bringing my actions closer to what I say love and responsibility should look like. If you have stayed with me to the end, thank you for listening to our story. If it made you think about your own boundaries or the way you were raised to handle family, I hope you hold on to that reflection. And if you feel comfortable sharing, I would be interested to know what this story brings up for you.